Well, welcome back to the Friday Bubble. We haven't seen you for a little while, but there was a really good reason today, which was to bring you the latest release of Winston Churchill. So Pol-Roger's prestige Cuvée started back with the 1975 when they released it in 1984. Now, the relationship with Churchill goes way back to 1945 when Odette Pol-Roger met Winston Churchill at a celebration of the freedom of Paris. So in the English embassy in Paris, they met over lunch and the relationship boomed over many years. Odette would always send Winston some of his favourite champagne on his birthday every year. Churchill liked a full-bodied champagne, so it's probably no surprise that he really enjoyed the Pol-Roger style. And then when the Prestige Cuvée was launched in memory of Churchill, there was no doubt it was going to be a Pinot dominated. To this day, we don't know exactly the blend of the Cuvée. We can have a guess, and perhaps I'll try later on, but it's very much kept as a family secret. So Pol-Roger, Sir Winston Churchill 15, just come out onto the market. Now, 2015 as a vintage was fascinating. It started off really nicely, and then May, June and July, it actually started getting a little bit too hot at times. And there was definitely a water shortage and a bit of drought conditions. Luckily, later in August, I love them when they surprise me, later in August, the weather went all wet. Now, this plumped up the grapes, which they needed at that time. The fear was that it would be a little bit of rot, but what happened is the weather cleared up and there was some lovely sunshine. So in a way, 15, when it was released, was seen as a really good potential vintage. There has been some question marks, and I'll be open, potentially related to the heat and perhaps some stress in the vines, that some of the 15s have a little bit of a vegetal character. So we're going to have a little look at that. I haven't tasted this Pol-Roger just yet, so we'll give it a few minutes just to open up in the glass while I tell you a little bit about it. So it's always Grand Cru fruit in Sir Winston Churchill. We don't know the proportion. We assume there's a bit more Pinot Noir than Chardonnay. It's fermented in stainless steel, so there's no oak, and it always goes through the malolactic. Now, the meaning of that is perhaps helps us understand some of the fruit sourcing, because I suspect some of the vineyards, or a lot of the vineyards for the Pinot Noir, are perhaps the more northerly facing villages of Verzenay and Mailly, and maybe also the classic south facing like Ailly and Bouzy and Verzy are probably a bit less in the blend because they would be much more ripe. So we know it's a little bit more Pinot Noir. The classic villages of the Côte de Blanc, obviously for the Chardonnay, goes through the malolactic, no oak. So let's have a little look at what that means on the aromatics today. Wow, well, there's lots of fruit. Initially, I've got all that usual classic citrusy. The one thing that really stands out is kind of like a pear, a really distinct pear aromatic. That's going to be interesting. So we'll see how this develops. Let me taste it. So there is a lovely freshness to this, which is interesting. Full malolactic, so that they've got really good source of grapes in this, which is why there's a lovely freshness, because you've got all that fruit. It finishes really dry and fresh. You can feel the salinity on the end as I'm talking to you. 7 grams of dosage, so relatively light. And this was disgorged in September 22. So, we're here sort of about 8 months on. So this is a little baby, really. And you can see that. It's only just kind of settling down. But the nice thing is, it's got a real abundance of fruit, and there's all the usual things. There's a little bit of orange actually starting to come through, which is the classic, one of the classic Pinot Noir characteristics. I'm fascinated today to try the comparison because they're two different vintages. The 2013 was the predecessor. This was the last vintage where they were picking in October. Ever since then, with global warming, the harvests have been coming earlier and earlier. So here they had a 2-week delay because it was relatively cool during September. and they weren't into full swing until the middle part of October. So we should have two really different expressions of Churchill here. So here we have now even just a minute or two, it's made a big difference. It's giving a little bit more fruit. So the 2015. Now let me have a look. We don't know anything about secrets of the differences in blends here, but perhaps not a great deal. So fascinating. You have got quite a different expression here. There's a lot more of those citrusy fruits on the 2013. That's fascinating. There's a lot more orange in there as well. And somehow, isn't this fascinating? The dosage is the same in these two champagnes. The 2015 somehow seems sweeter. Now sweeter, I'm guessing, really relates to ripeness of fruit, which would be true. The 15, it was a much warmer expression of a vintage. 2013 was a much cooler expression. And you can see that in the profiles here. It's really fascinating. Now this has had another 18 months post-disgorgement time. One of the things I've always thought about 2013s is they seem very slow maturing. And having tasted this quite a few times over the last 2 years, you can see that. It's very, very gently moving along its maturation. So there's no rush. This is, barely seems ready to be drinking the 2013. The orange, the bitter orange is really attractive on this. And that perhaps is the one thing that I'm seeing evolve over the last 18 months. The dried fruit is just starting to come out. Now, if we go back and have a look at the 15, now it is starting to sing a little more with a bit of time in the glass. So you've got all that beautiful citrus. There's some lovely pear and grapefruit. And again, just a touch of the orange. I think you can definitely see the differences in the years here. 2013 has much more of that zippy acidity. The 2015 is not short of it, but it's a little bit rounder. And I think you can definitely see that it's a riper year. And there's a lot more of those sort of yellow, rich, ripe fruits in there. So there we go. Really good expression of two Churchills. I always try and ask Essie when she's here, which one does she prefer today? So I'll have to ask myself that question. Today, I think the one that's drinking really nicely is the 2015, actually. 2013 still needs a lot more time. So I would drink 2015 today and still hold on to the 13 and not rush about drinking it. So there we go. Welcome back to the Friday Bubble, and cheers, everybody.